Why do you think? You tell me. Why do you think your congressmen, your left, your leaders who are in the Democratic Party, and I'm talking to Democrats, I'm not a Democrat, but I'm talking to Democrats. Why do you think they are so feckless? Why do you think they're so weak and worthless in regards to this notion of winning, in regards to this notion of policy, in regards to this notion of fighting for you? Why do you have to continuously push somebody once they get in office the moment that you lose all leverage in order to push them at all? Have you ever thought about that? Is it possible that you guys have been doing politics wrong? And I'm talking about this from the standpoint of the left more than anyone else. But my basic point is correct. Why do you think Nancy Pelosi is that weak and feckless in that office? Understand what is taking place. You've had 3 or 4 packages, stimulus packages. They've given a bunch of money to the payment protection program. The Democrats, the best that they could get was testing. Now, testing is like saying I take care of my kids because they're your kids. As a basic function of the government itself, that should have been part of it. The notion that the best thing that you could get out of a fight for something like that is something that should have already been a part is embarrassing. This is kind of my point. It doesn't bother you that these guys are this weak and ineffective? We're in the middle of a pandemic. If this was, let's say, back in the 50s and the 60s, they would have been trying to knock this shit to the moon. But your Democratic Party, after years of unaccountability, after years of incrementalism, after years of neoliberalism, where they care more about markets than human beings, what happened? $1,200, workers' comp, and not just workers' comp, unemployment. But keep in mind, many people weren't able to get the unemployment. Many people, because of the way the systems were set up, 70% didn't get the money that they needed. The rent payment needed to be due. The car payment needed to be due. All of these bills and expenses were still there. And yet, when the federal government was actually needed, we paid taxes, all of us, for years on end. And when you finally need something, the federal government is ineffective in giving it because for so long, they didn't give a shit about unemployment benefits to people. And so those systems were inefficient in getting the money out. Then they give $1,200 out and believes that the $1,200 is supposed to last for like 12 weeks. Then in the exact same plan, they give trillions to their donors, trillions to their owner class. And they come back and give multiple things, not giving a shit about the human beings that at that point were at their wits' end. Why do you think that party is that way? And I'm asking this honestly. I'm not being a dick about the way I'm asking this question. I'm asking this very basically. Let me answer the question. They are that way because you've never allowed accountability into the process. Going back to the time where Clinton was in office and Clinton cuts welfare, Clinton passes NAFTA, Clinton destroys the Telecommunications Act, Clinton destroys Glass-Steagall. Now, these were horrific policies that were basically right-wing policies. If the left, at that moment, when he said you have nowhere else to go, balked and refused to back Clinton and Clinton lost, what would have happened? Now, engage my point for the moment. Understand that there's a separation and a difference between the Democratic Party losing and you losing. And elections have multiple consequences, not just a person who wins or loses that election. Clinton losing would have set a standard. And I would argue to you that the standard at times is far more important than whether or not a particular party or a particular person wins or loses. A standard matters. There should be some level of integrity in your party. And if there is a level of integrity, some level of institutional integrity in regards to what you stand for and what you're willing to accept and what you're not. And the moment that standard goes away, that party is going to shift in the direction of the hardest win. And it's just so happened that hardest win has been cash. And when it was realized that you would break a standard, not even fight for a standard, the next 4 years, the person gets worse. Why? Because they understood that you were willing to break that standard because you were so tired of Republicans. The next 4 years, the standard gets worse. Meaning the fact that you weren't willing to set a standard in regards to what that party stood for ideologically, it made it so that reflexively or relatively speaking, dealing with Republicans, there was no objective place for you to put a stake in. You just got worse and worse and worse. At no point, because you kept with that narrow-focused pragmatism of the moment without looking at elections in the context of time, where you can see that that one concentration camp less guy ends up building one concentration camp less, but in 10 years, the relative distance between the two now has 10 concentration camps. And the narrow focused pragmatist will say, well, one is better than two, right? 10 is better than 11, right? 12 is better than 14, right? 14, two less concentration camps. I hope you get my point. Yes, I'm being hyperbolic when I say the concentration camps argument, but I'm making the point that as you allow one standard after the next to effectively be broken to the point where there is no accountability in the process, then you have been putting people in that office for who they weren't, not because of an affirmative argument of who they were. So they didn't need to be anything. They didn't need to do anything. They didn't even need to have a strong ideology in regards to the way they were functioning. They do have a strong ideology focused around cash, but not necessarily around you. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. Stopping Clinton at that particular moment would have set a standard in regards to what the Democratic Party stood for in some ideological fashion. Allowing it to go from year after year after year without ever having any accountability in the process, allow you to get to the point where you now have a man accused of a rape allegation that can barely get out a few sentences before either stumbling or looking like he's just kind of dazed and spacey. That's your candidate. That's what you were willing to accept. At some point, where does the standard, where's the line? Understand what I'm asking you. Is there a point where the Democratic Party is so horrible where you say, I can't deal with this anymore, and you balk? Now, my point to you is that ability to balk and leave and stop finding yourself as part of that particular party and let that party be on its own and function from the standpoint of, I want policy accomplished. We've been doing politics wrong from the standpoint of the left. And we've been incentivized to do it wrong because basically we just kind of picked up the behaviors of the people before us. That needs to stop. If you want to get anything accomplished, you need to extricate yourself from the party. Start looking at yourself as an individual, not being part of the party, and focus on the policy that you want to accomplish. And get a bunch of other people to stand there with policy. And ask a very basic question to the Democratic Party. If Trump is that bad, if he's that much of an ogre, then you should be willing to compromise and select Medicare for all, expansion of Social Security, and elimination of student debt. Maybe we can negotiate on some of that. Medicare for all is non-negotiable. But again, if Trump is such an ogre, if he's going to be eating babies and kicking puppies, and he's going to bring on the apocalypse, then it seems that accepting concessions is a small price to pay in order to stop him. It is up to the party itself. That's where you should stand. And at the end of the process, if they scream that you made them lose, you say, God damn right. You were warned, accept these policies, and you win. Don't accept them, and you lose. That's not on me. That's on you. Your job is to get my vote. I told you what I needed for me to give you my vote. You didn't do it. That's what you need to be. Separate and distinct. It gives you a more objective point of view when you're looking at political events and you're looking at the way parties go, and you're looking at the momentum of the parties, especially in the context of time. And it also has somewhat of an evolved understanding and realizing that a loss at a particular point may be a loss for a particular candidate, but it may be a win in maintaining a standard that you don't necessarily want to go, just based on any notion of ideological integrity of the party. It goes beyond just helping a particular party all the time. The blue no matter who stuff is nonsense. There's another effect of this, by the way. 50% of the population doesn't vote. You know why? The majority of that population that doesn't vote, black, people of color, poor. The very demographic that you would think would vote Democrat. The reason they don't is because they've been so disengaged from the system, from this blue no matter who shit, from these candidates being so feckless and worthless that they disengage from the political system, meaning taking on this behavior where you vote whatever without necessarily having a standard undermines your own party's ability to win in the future, especially from the standpoint of the Democratic Party. I'll leave it here. I'm just saying, if you're wondering why your candidates are so horrific and so horrible, start there. Democrat, 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. I'll end it here. Like, share, subscribe.